بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا.
To introduce the many people we have packed into the studio this afternoon for our debate. We're talking about Islam and Christianity. It's a subject that we often come round to at some point here on Unbelievable. And we're welcoming, as we often do for this type of debate, Jay Smith. Jay is an evangelist and apologist. He has a ministry here in the UK, particularly debating and dialoguing with Muslims. And Jay, welcome back to the programme. It's great to have you back.
Good to be back.
Thank you for coming. You've just returned from a trip to Canada, I understand. You were out there talking with another top-ranking Islamic speaker.
That's right. I debated Shabir Ali on peace and violence in Christianity and Islam.
And that was part of a church conference, I understand.
It was part of a denominational conference, a national conference there in Toronto.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear more about that perhaps later on. But our other guests here in the studio, as I say, many more than usual, than we usually pack in here. But we have Beth Grove as well accompanying Jay. Beth, you are part of the Hyde Park Christian Fellowship, and I had the pleasure recently of accompanying you and Jay to one of the debates that take place there regularly on a Sunday afternoon. More about that later. But you personally work with refugees, I understand. So is this where your initial contact with Muslims came from and your interest in dialogue?
Yeah, that's when I first met Muslims and began having many Muslim friends and teaching them English and just enjoying friendship with them, but also helping them assimilate into British culture and learn how to deal with all our complicated sort of social system we have here with benefits and all the rest of it. You're
a Christian. Is that something you've had as a faith for a long time, since sort of childhood?
I first committed my life to the Lord when I was 5, so I was very young, and I remember it very clearly when being very prompted quite clearly by God to commit my life, and then I recommitted again as a 16-year-old when I was a teenager. So yes, it's been a long journey, but I've been a Christian for quite a few years now.
And you've been taking part in the kind of discussions, the kind of discussion we're having today for a number of years. I mean, how long have you kind of been interacting in this way with other
I first went down to Speaker's Corner 8-9 years ago, and it was after a debate between Jay Smith and Sheikh Umar Bakri Muhammad, and it was an incredible debate. It was life-changing for me, so I decided to go down and see what this was, all these debates between Muslims and Christians, and I was quite interested in that. So that's how it all got started.
You caught the bug, and
yes.
You've been going on since. Thanks for coming in. Those are our Christian representatives on the programme today. Our Muslim representatives, both new to this programme, so it's a real pleasure to welcome them along. Adnan Rashid and also Hamza Tzortzis. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. But first of all, Adnan, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Adnan. How you've presumably subscribed to Islam all your life.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Thank you very much, first of all, Justin, for inviting us on this debate. I have been a Muslim for most of my life. I became a practicing Muslim in 2001, and it has been fascinating since then.
That's interesting. What sparked the move, as you say, from presumably some kind of nominal Islam into practicing Islam in 2001?
basically, a lot of factors in my life. I had a life which was not Islamic at all. I was doing a lot of things which were not prescribed by Islam. They were forbidden by Islam. I had no peace, inner peace within myself. I was seeking spiritual peace as well as physical harmony within myself. And I came across some scholars of Islam, and I asked them intellectual questions. They answered them very nicely, and I was impressed, and I decided that this is the way for me if I really want to gain peace in my life and salvation as well.
2001, of course, a significant year. 9/11. That's many people see that, I think, as a turning point in the way that the West interacts now with Islam. For you, would you say that as a Muslim, it's been harder to kind of if you like, live your faith in this country since those events? Is it something that has produced more kind of dialogue and interaction with other people? What's been...
Absolutely. I think the life of the Muslims have become more difficult in this country due to 9/11. And people who really wanted to demonize Islam out there in media or journalists or politicians, I think because of this particular event, they've had a free hand in order to demonize Islam. And there is, it seems to me, there is a lack of understanding about Islam in masses. And I think media has to play a role which you are playing right now, and which we appreciate, that we have to have Muslims to speak for themselves, and we shouldn't have other commentators or other so-called experts of Islam commenting on Islam. It has to be Muslims who should explain Islam.
Well, we're going to be doing that, certainly, in the debate, having, obviously, forthright opinions, and helping us in that as well, Hamza Tzortzis. Am I pronouncing that about correctly, Hamza? I don't know if
Yes, you are.
And you're actually half Greek, I understand.
Actually, I'm fully Greek.
Fully Greek?
I'm a Greek convert to Islam.
I see.
I converted to Islam approximately 6 years ago. As a result of a extremely long journey, I was brought up in a secular humanist family with a loosely Christian tradition. My dad is what you would call a New Age spiritualist, a humanist. He is currently reading the book, which Jay and Beth may know of, a book of miracles by the psychiatrist, Christian psychiatrist, that's loosely based on biblical text.
Right.
He's not scriptural, he's more of a spiritualist. And he did bring us up to read many books and literature and analyze things. So as a result of intense intellectual activity in terms of the existence of a creator and the miraculous nature of the Quran, I adopted Islam as my belief, and from there it's been a very powerful journey in terms of aligning my emotions and my heart, if you like, into the Islamic scripture.
And you now do a fair bit of public speaking, I understand. You lecture on Islam.
Yeah, I do lecture, international lecture in terms of I've been to Canada, I've spoken in India, I've spoken in the Netherlands on issues related to community cohesion, politics, the Quran, and how we should approach the text. And I think it's been very positive because people, whether they want to become Muslim or not, are very thirsty for information because they want to transcend the hype and the rhetoric that's been emanating from different media outlets. And I think today is very positive as well, because in the Quran it tells us that we've been created differently in order to come to know one another. And I always question, I say, why doesn't it say to love one another? Because actually knowledge is usually the basis for love and the basis of removing doubt, suspicion, anxieties, etc. So when we remove that ignorance, I think when we come together it's very positive. And I think in that light we should proceed, and in the light of a very famous tradition, prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he says, to cure ignorance you just have to ask and learn.
Well, we're talking this afternoon about which is more relevant for 21st century Britain, Islam or Christianity. It's probably not a conversation we would have been having 20 years ago, because in a sense there wasn't so much well, Islam simply wasn't as obvious a factor in the life of this country as it now is, and that's obviously partly down to immigration. There are many more people from the Middle East and other areas of the world who profess Islam, who are coming and living here, and of course certain events as we've discussed, 9/11, and of course very soon coming up is the 3rd anniversary of 7/7. It's highlighted for many people that there are questions to be asked, and we need to understand each other. We need to understand what would motivate those young men to do what they did, and I hope obviously in the course of the programme you may be able to shed some light on that, Hamza and Adnan. And Beth and Jay, I know that from your point of view you're here to argue that Christianity is the most relevant faith for Britain, is the most relevant way of doing things. I mean, but you'd be keen at the same time not to suggest that you're in some way anti-Muslim. I think that there's a danger there that you're going to be seen as somehow, if you like, against the people. But that's not where you're coming from, is it?
No, and I think before we even start, it's better to define terms. We do this all the time at the corner, Adnan and I, and that is if we're going to talk about Islam, we need to know what Islam we're talking about. And I would venture as a definition for the debate today that we talk about that which defines Islam, and for the Muslim it should be the Quran and the traditions which surround it, the Sirah, the Hadith, the Tafsir, the Tahriq. For the Christian it has to be the New Testament. That's what defines us, that's what we follow, that's where we use as our paradigm, our authority. And I would also ask for the Muslims, and I assume they're going to agree, that the model for that scripture would be their prophet Muhammad, and the model for our scripture would be Jesus Christ. So if we can follow that definition, then we're not going to be talking about Islam here, Islam there, or Christianity here or there. We're talking about really the foundation for both. I think it'd be easier to do that. I think also it'll probably get us to the nub of the matter, and that is the Islam of the prophet, is the Islam of the Quran relevant for the 21st century, or is the New Testament and the Gospel of Jesus Christ more relevant for Britain today?
Well, thank you, and I think that's a great starting point. We're going to be discussing that, so do stay tuned here on Unbelievable. Just a short break and we'll be back as we really get into this discussion. And as Jay alluded to there, Adnan and he are no strangers to each other. In fact, they describe themselves as friends. They frequently debate each other at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. And if you want to hear a fascinating day in the life of what Jay does and Beth does and Adnan does, do tune into Inspirational Breakfast from 9 o'clock on Monday morning. That's the 7th of July. There'll be a special documentary that I've put together, and you can hear something of what happens down at the park and the kind of reactions from some of the people down there as well. That's from 9 o'clock on Monday on Inspirational Breakfast here on Premier. We'll be back in just a moment as we continue and really kick off this debate on which is more relevant for 21st century Britain, Christianity or Islam.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Just a couple of days away from the 3rd anniversary of the 7/7 bombings, and it's an event in the life of this country that really, raised huge questions about how Islam is to be viewed, how to be integrated within the life of this country. And we're going to be looking at some controversial topics today. Don't expect to hear, if you like, a very, muted, even polite perhaps conversation. There's going to be some passionate views being expressed on the programme today, but that's what we're here for on Unbelievable, as we ask which is more relevant for 21st century Britain, Islam or Christianity. To help us do that in the studio, Jay Smith, evangelist and apologist, Beth Grove, who works alongside Muslims in her work with refugees, Hamza Tzortzis is a lecturer on aspects of Islam, and Adnan Rashid is here, a student of Islam and part of the Hidden Institute, a Muslim think tank. It's a packed studio, it's a packed programme as we discuss this very important, sometimes controversial question. For you, Jay, do you believe that the events of 7/7 are in some way a kind of, unfortunately, a natural outworking of what Islam is going to mean for this country in the long run? Do you feel that this is kind of something that you feel is a warning sign for where we're headed with Islam, increasingly predominant in the country?
No, I'm going to hurt your argument on this, and I say no. I think what happened in 7/7 was anathema, was an aberration of the Islam that I know, and I'm sure my counterparts would say the same thing here. 7/7 unfortunately got us off on the wrong track, and I think focused people the wrong direction. And I think because of 7/7 there has been a reaction against that, of the violence that it was perpetrated at that time. What I think the agenda that I would like to talk about is not the 7/7 agenda. I think there's a much more pervasive agenda, and I think probably something more immediate is what you saw in the paper this morning concerning what Lord Phillips is saying. Lord Phillips, the High Court Justice, who says that Islamic law is parts of Islamic law are legitimate and can be incorporated, can be practiced here in Britain. It's that type, it's that material, it's that culture, it's those laws and institutions that I'm more concerned about, because Islam is much more than a faith. And I think we need to define that, and we need to ask, what is it that Islam wants and what is it that it will do? And by doing that, looking back and see what it has done for the last 1400 years. I think we must not get sidetracked by 7/7.
So what are your primary concerns then about Islam and what it means for Britain?
I think in the question of relevancy, Christianity is a faith that is a private faith, that is something that is chosen by each individual, and so therefore the rules and regulations, if they are called that, or the precepts of Christianity, are for those people and those people alone. It is not something that is to be imposed on others outside of the faith. Islam, however, starts from another paradigm. Christianity separates the church and the state. Islam brings the two together. So Islam sees itself as an all-encompassing religion, faith, but also a whole way of life, which is inevitably will be imposed even on those who do not participate, who are not believers. And we can see this happening in the last 1400 years. You can see it happening certainly in a lot of Muslim countries today. That's what concerns me, because when you talk about Britain, which has a strong inheritance, a strong heritage of Judeo-Christian background. Not to say this is a Christian nation, because we don't believe in such a thing as a Christian nation, using the definition I just used. We separate the two. The state over here is a secular state, must remain secular, but the faith itself, for Christians, though it impinges on every area of our life, it only impinges on our areas of life. By virtue of the fact that Islam brings the two together, it will therefore impose itself economically, politically, socially, and that's what concerns me, because that's where the irrelevancy comes in, because I don't believe it can be relevant in those issues.
Do you see that being at odds then with a democratic, free society in that sense? That Islam, in its ultimate manifestation, would mean that people's rights were taken away because they would be forced to do what Islam requires?
Democratically speaking, is the process by which we elect a government, and the democratic vote stipulates and starts from the premise that everybody has equal vote. In some ways, even that has biblical connotations in 1 Peter 2:7, where we have the idea of the church, priesthood of all believers. So you can even see that principle is embellished in the New Testament model. The idea and the problem I have with Islam is that the democratic process, if we see the example of it happening around the world, the democratic process can quickly be curtailed, and that those who live in a Islamic context, if that was brought in through democratic means, through the vote, through majority vote, and I think that's a very real possibility for Europe. If you look at the demographic changes, I think the majority populations in places like France in the year 2050 will be Muslim. This country, it'll be a few decades later. If that is the case, what will that majority vote bring in? Will they bring in Islamic law? Will they start bringing in those laws that were modeled by the Prophet in the 7th century, and also that we see exemplified in the laws of fiqh? If that is so, and if that's what they use the democratic process to do, then I am very concerned, because many of those laws I find are debilitating for minorities. They would be debilitating for me as a Christian. They have been for many of my brothers in Muslim countries today. But it is because I see it exemplified in what the Prophet did in Medina. I see exemplified certainly what happened in the first 40 years of Islam. I should therefore be concerned. I think everybody should be concerned if they use a democratic process to bring that kind of state, that kind of theocratic state.
Adnan, a response from you then, because Jay is worried at what Islam means. That essentially it's you can't separate Islam from the state, from the running of the state. So ultimately your ultimate aspiration is to see Britain become an Islamic state. I mean, is that true?
That is not true at all. First of all, we have to see whether separating church from state is possible. It is peculiarly a Christian idea which was new to the mankind. If we see the past, if we look at Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Assyrians, and Muslims and the Jews in Judea and Israel, when they had their own states, they were governing with religious law. Religion was part of life. People were living these religions as way of life. But the Paul's theology, when Paul's theology was introduced into Christianity, Christianity of Paul, not Christianity of Christ, because as I see Christianity as a new idea coming from Paul. Paul is a man who, as an individual, saw a vision and gave his own theology against that of Jesus. So I see this idea of separating church from state being not practical. It is not practical at all. It is almost impossible to separate church from state, because religion will always dominate your policies, political policies, as we can see in European history. The Catholics and the Protestants in so-called enlightened era were burning people alive. Heretics were burnt alive. Witches were burnt alive. There were massacres in the name of religion. These were political massacres, but they were done in the name of religion. So what we have to understand is that this phenomena known as Christianity, which is separated from the state, it's not practical at all, because there will always be a case of religion influencing the policies. Now, what we have to come to Islam. What has Islam done for Britain in past, and what Islam wants to do for Britain in the future? We start from Middle Ages, when Islam started. We have scholars coming from England, from Britain, going to Islamic Spain and learning the sciences from Muslims. Muslims are teaching in Islamic Spain, and Europe at the time was in dark ages. We had people like Robert of Catton, Adil of Bath, Daniel of Mole, and these people came to Spain. Daniel of Mole was one of the scholars who came to Islamic Spain in Toledo, learned from Islamic scholars, took manuscripts back to England, got together with Bishop John of Norwich, established a school of philosophy in Oxford, which came to be known as Oxford University. This is the fruit of Islam for Britain, starting then. Now we come to the modern era, when John Locke is writing, the founder of modern and liberal democracy. Democratic principles, as the Europeans know them today, or Britain knows them today, came from Islam in a large proportion. For example, I'll give you an example. John Locke, who is the founder of liberal democracy, was writing treatises on tolerance. He was asking the church at the time to be tolerant towards other people who are different, and he was highly influenced by a professor called Edward Pocock, who was the professor of Islamic studies in Oxford University, and he himself writes in his writings that he is influenced by this person. So
you feel there's a lot that Islam has offered to the history of this country,
absolutely,
and, up to this point. But that's not your concern, is it? Particularly, Jay, your concern is what Islam would do to the country if it was instituted in some kind of strict way. That you're suggesting that Adnan...
I'm also concerned with the statement that Adnan made, that it is impossible for the state and church to be separate. If you look at our history, you look for the first 300 years, we did exactly that. And the examples that Adnan's going to bring up are the atrocities, and there are many atrocities the church did do. Every one of those atrocities is when the church and state were together, when Constantine brought the church and state together in the 4th century. He did something that Christ never did, and that's why this discussion will just be talking past each other if he's only going to use those type of examples, because he's proving my point. Those are the atrocities that I see have already happened to Europe. We already know, and we don't want that to be repeated again, that I think that Islam can and will do, because the same atrocities happen.
That is the history of Christianity. I'll give you an example.
Absolutely, but that's after the 4th century.
When someone
let me finish. After the 4th century, that is the history. But then you got to ask, why is that history was engaged? And it's because of the fact that they went against what Christ had demanded. Christ is very clear that you give to Caesar what is Caesar, you give to God what is God. Matthew 22, verse 21. And that's the... Adnan, you be careful here. Don't start interrupting here. This is not Speaker's Corner.
I think we need to contextualize. Can I say
well, yes. Okay, Hamza, what did you want to say on that?
I think what we need to understand first and foremost is that we are talking essentially here about secularism. We are talking about, is secularism appropriate in the 21st century? Now, we have to go a little bit in history. Now, when we saw the negative reaction as a result of the oppression of the state in history, we saw the thinkers on one side talking about that church should be separated, and on the other side, church leaders or those in power that you can call Christian, or maybe it was a misinterpretation of what Jesus was supposed to have said. There was this negative reaction. As a result of the negative reaction, there was a compromise. And that compromise solution led to two things. You have your religion in your personal life, and for other affairs, we will use the human mind. And this is the problem for the Muslim, because the Muslim likes to refer his soul, his being, his whole essence to Scripture. Now, if you're going to start separating your ideas, your fundamental basis in life from politics, society, and everything else, there's a big issue. And for me, it shows one of the failures of Christianity to be able to solve human problems, because economics is a human problem, poverty is a human problem, how to judge people is a human problem, and Islam doesn't have that tradition. We don't have that historical baggage. I'll give you an example. In history, if you read Philip Mansell's book, 1453, you have a letter of a rabbi writing to his brethren in persecuted Europe saying, come to the land of the Muslims, come to the land of the Turks. You have other historical instances supported by Western and Eastern scholarship saying that the judges at the time in the Islamic era, in the Islamic state, in the Quranic governance, the Islamic judges used to judge fairly between Muslim, Christian and Jew. And the Jews had the option, and the Christians had the option to go to the priest or to go to the rabbi, but they refused to do so because of the fact Islam deals with problems in a human way, not in an Islamic way, which I mean you have to be Muslim, because Jay is fantastic. He's definitely right in what he said, that Islam is an ideology. It affects your spiritual life and it affects your political life. However, it's not an imposed political framework. Because we see in history, even in the times of the Crusades, Christians and Jews were fighting with the Muslims.
So they were willingly, if you like, putting themselves under this Islamic law. But what would you say to that, Beth? I mean, do you think that Islam has this kind of fair and just, if it was done in the way that it was done in that golden era, etc., that there would be this sort of peace and harmony where even Christians would be happy to subject themselves to Islamic law?
Well, I think when you look at history, actually, Christians and non-Christians, say, atheists, have given themselves under the protection of Islamic law. But the problem is, if you look at Islamic law, say Sharia or other law, and even what the Quran itself says, it doesn't actually protect my freedoms. And most people who did get protection under Islamic law, take Turkey, where the Armenian genocide happened, etc., they had to abide by Islamic principles. They had to either become a Muslim, or they had to pay a jizya tax or tax in order to be protected by a Muslim state. So actually it's not a protection, there's still an imposition, because we are not allowed to freely function, say, as a Christian or as an atheist in that society. We would have to abide by some of the impositions put on us, the tax, or even convert to Islam. Certainly Armenians in Turkey, if they converted to Islam, that is what protected them. So I would say generally it doesn't. Certainly Sharia law, if you read Sharia law, the four schools of Sharia law do not protect. And another thing, one thing that perhaps about separating church and state. With church and state, why it does work is because it doesn't mean doesn't mean a Christian doesn't bring his belief into his public life. He does bring it into his public life, but he does not impose that on others. For example, we have this idea in Christianity of called redemption and lift. What it means is that our life is changed. So a person's individual life is changed. When a person's individual life is changed, his family begins to be changed. Then after that, his community begins to be changed, and after that, his whole social field begins to be changed, and then his whole culture begins to be changed. And it's Christian principles coming from the inside, changing culture, not imposing, not demanding rules and regulations, demanding jizya tax, or demanding that we convert to Islam, but allowing culture to change for the better, for honesty, for etc., for good economy, etc.
What Hamza appears to be saying, and you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, Hamza, but
there needs a clarification here.
Is that the Islam, if you like, has everything. It has the religious and spiritual side, the edification of oneself, getting right with God, but it also has this political side where everything is kind of, it's a whole package, and Christianity lacks that. It doesn't have these kind of ways of...
Well, the issue is you always need law in society. Even in a secular framework, you're going to have laws and regulations. Now, the situation is, if you want to start talking about Sharia law, then you need to be using some references instead of, like, in my opinion, which are generalizations and swiping statements. let me give you an example. There's a mutawatir hadith, which basically means a recurrent reporting, which is on the same level as the Quran for the Muslims. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, said, whoever harms a non-Muslim under the protection of the Muslims, a dhimmi, harms me. And this is a huge statement here. And this is reflected, for example, in a classical Islamic scholar in the medieval times, Imam Qarafi. He summed up the responsibility of the caliphate to the dhimmi when he said, it is the responsibility of the Muslims to the people of the dhimma to care for the weak, to fulfill the needs of the poor, to feed the hungry, provide clothes, address them politely, and even tolerate them even if they were to harm them. And the situation with the jizya, this is something that needs to be clarified for the Christian audience, because I always, when I discuss with Christians, they always bring this up. The jizya
we're talking about the tax here.
Is a normal tax.
Okay.
Muslims get taxed higher than the non-Muslims of the state, for one. Yeah? For one. Let me finish.
Not
Let me
historically.
finish.
We'll allow Jay to respond to that.
If it was, maybe there may be some negative historical manifestations, we may agree, but that's not the case with the text. Secondly, the jizya is not imposed to women, and it's not imposed to people who can't afford it. There's a famous story of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the right and left-hand man, if you like, of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he saw a poor dhimmi, a non-Muslim of the state, begging and saying, the jizya is too high, I can't afford it. And when he saw this, he said, don't people know that it's not applied to you? And he went to the Bait al-Mal, which is basically the funds of the state, and gave him money and said, you don't have to pay the jizya anymore. So it's a fallacy to bring this example up, because it has no application in text or history generally.
Jay has to say
Hamza,
on this whole
this
issue.
is great. The way he spins this is fine, because he's going to give you example after example of individuals who have gone against their own precepts. And I think we need to go back to those precepts. We need to go back to those laws and institutions. We need to go back to these schools of law that Beth first referred to, because it's there that you're going to find the foundation. However, Muslims want to spin it depending on where they live and what the exegesis of their situation is. Such as, let me just give you some examples. The Al-Risala, the Maliki school, stipulates that a blood rate for a kafir is half that of a Muslim.
The Shafi school.
I'm sorry, if you want to talk to Maliki, Ibn Hazm also stipulates that in Volume 8. The dhimmis are protected persons not permitted government or policy, according to Maududi in the meaning of the Quran. The jizya tax that he refers to is for punishment levied in humiliation, according to Surah Tawbah 929 and Al-Hidayah, Volume 3. Now listen, ask yourself, look and see when the jizya and the kharaj tax were imposed in the 7th and 8th and 9th century. When you look at the kharaj and the jizya tax that were imposed on the dhimmis, it was 15 to 20%.
Just for those who aren't familiar, dhimmi meaning unbelievers.
No, the believers are the protected people.
Okay.
They're protected by the state. They are the Al-Kitab, that means the people of the book like us, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. No church buildings were permitted to be built, according to Ibn Hazm, Volume 4. Ibn Taymiyyah also says that in Volume 28. No Christian testimony in law, according to Al-Bukhari, Volume 3. The cursing of Muhammad is considered to be a capital offense, according to Maliki's Al-Risala. Now, that's interesting, because that's a law that's now being imposed in your land, in Pakistan, what we call the 295C law. The non-Abrahamic faiths are banned. That is completely from, according to Al-Bukhari 4, Akhbar number 393. And that apostates are given 3 days to repent, and then they are executed.
So effectively what you're saying is, if this was introduced here, it would mean a complete lack of religious freedom.
If they're not introduced, these are the foundational laws that Muslims must come back to. Now, I would venture to say that these two gentlemen over here will not want to impose these laws. By virtue of the fact they live in Britain, by virtue of the fact that they have to live under British law, they cannot impose these. But it's let me finish, it's what these laws will bring up and what Muslims will go back to for their authority that will be used in the future that concerns me.
Okay, before we get some response, and I know you guys are desperate to do that, I just want to let those who are listening know we're talking about which is more relevant for 21st century Britain, Islam or Christianity. If you want to get in touch with your views on this, do welcome your emails. That's unbelievable@premier.org.uk. And if you want to leave me a voicemail message, the phone lines are open. You can do that. I'll happily play it out next week and pass any relevant ones on to our guests. The number 08456 52 52 52 and select option 5.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
So what Jay has been referencing there, Adnan, do you feel that this is a fair representation of what it would mean in the future were you to adhere to the laws that you think are are the just laws of the land? These kind of
absolutely not. It is fascinating that Jay wouldn't refer to Prophet himself and his laws and how he treated the non-Muslims. We will come to listen to that in a minute. What I have to bring in. This is a treaty of Prophet Muhammad, which he agreed with the Christians of Najran. Najran is a town north of Yemen, and these are the Christians of Najran, and he reached and agreed this treaty with them. And I quote, "The lives of the Prophet of life of the people of Najran and its surrounding area, their religion, their land, property, cattle, and those of them who are present or absent, their messengers and their places of worship are under the protection of Allah and guardianship of His Prophet. Their present state shall neither be interfered with, nor their rights meddled with, nor their idols deformed. No uskuf, no bishop shall be removed from his office, the intention being that no change in whatever state everyone is shall be made. Neither the people shall be punished for any past crimes or murder, nor shall they be compelled to do military service. Neither shall ushr be imposed on them, nor any army shall enter the area." Amazing, fascinating stuff. And Jay never comes up with this kind of stuff. What about the Treaty of Jerusalem? Umar bin Khattab, the second Caliph of Islam, when he conquered or when he took the keys of Jerusalem from Patriarch Sophronius, what did he agree with him? He gave the treaty quote, and I quote, "This is the treaty between the Christians of Aliyah and Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers, Umar bin Khattab. Thus, protection is given to their land, their property, their churches. No bishop shall be removed from their offices. No pressure whatsoever shall be put upon them in religious affairs." Quote unquote. Again, coming to another treaty of Muslims in Islamic Spain. 711 Muslims took Spain, and this treaty was agreed between Muslims and Christians of Spain in 713. And treaty states, "This is a treaty between the Christians of Spain and the leader of the Muslims, Abdulaziz bin Musa bin Nusayr. Thus protection is given to their land, their property, their churches. No bishop shall be removed. All they have to pay 1 gold coin a year as a tax to protect their property."
What about the situation of apostasy? Was that punishable by death? Is that something that, where a Muslim converts to Christianity? Is that something that would be punishable by
I think
death?
there needs to be a context here. Generally, with when we recite scripture, so it doesn't become a debate that could only be described as a joke. I'll tell you why. Because if we open any secular law book, a statute law book, and we don't have any background information or any tools in place in order to derive legislation and law, we could misinterpret. For example, if a butcher went to read a law book, a statute law book, he could come up with anything. For example, in UK law, there's 4 rules of interpretation. You have the literal rule, the golden rule, the purposive rule, and the mischief rule. And these are designed in order to extract law from the statutes. The Quran cannot be seen just like the way Jay sees it, quote and misquote, because there's a whole corpus of material. Just like in biblical theology, there's systematic theology. The Quran is seen as a spiritual and a legislative text, and you must have the tools in place in order to derive the law. Now, just to quote and misquote, that's why I would not quote the Bible, because I don't have the tools in place in order to do that.
Before we go to a break, just 2 minutes, and I just want to get a quick response from Beth, because, I mean, is this just cherry picking and not really giving the whole idea of what the whole thing's about?
I studied some of the Sharia law, the Maliki manuals, etc., for my thesis, especially looking at women's issues, but also looking at apostasy. And it is not a misquote when it says in the Sharia that there are no rights for apostates over their property. When someone becomes an apostate, their marriage is annulled. It also says that an apostate wife cannot receive maintenance. This is in the Sharia and the Maliki manual.
Maliki?
If you look at apostate wife has no maintenance in Hanafi 3655.
But these schools of thought are opinions. They are not Sharia. How do we define Sharia in Islam? Sharia is the law which is derived from Quran and Sunnah. So in other words, Sharia is Quran and the Hadith of Prophet Muhammad.
There's even a worse verse in the Quran.
Not the opinion of Abu Hanifa, Malik,
we'll come back to this after the break.
What I would like to do is take on this question. Take this question that he says, and that is, what do we do with the Prophet himself? I think we need to go back. And we need to compare. Remember what the question of this whole debate is. Is it relevant for Britain in the 21st century? Now, you're already saying that they're trying to they're trying to manipulate these laws so that it will become relevant for 21st century Britain, which is basically based on a Judeo-Christian principle. Fascinating that nobody's thrown this question against Christianity. If you notice, everything has been basically leveled against why does Islam have to impose, or why it has to reinterpret its law to placate us today.
We're going to
Christian law doesn't have that question.
We're going to come back to that, and perhaps Adnan and Hamza will have something to say to that.
Answer, we're going
to take a quick break here. We'll be back in just a moment. And as far as you're concerned, Jay, it's all about getting back to what the central paradigms are of both faiths, which has more relevance to the kind of life we want to see in Britain today.
Yeah, we are a product of that 2,000 years, you might say, of Judeo-Christian influence. We're not a Christian state. We would be the first to admit that. And here in the West, and certainly in Britain, we do not like to see religion imposed on us. We don't like to see religious precepts. Because by definition, religious precepts start from a supposition that it's divine edict. Divine edict means it cannot be critiqued, cannot be changed. It is universal, and as a result, many Christians and non-Christians would stand away and say, no, God works within society. God works within culture. And if you look certainly at the Christian model, you will see that when Christ came to earth, he came and he worked within the culture that he found there. Paul, when you look at the exegesis of how he took the gospel and explained it, he explained it differently in Ephesus than the way he did it in Galatia, and he explained it differently in Galatia than he did in Corinth. That kind of model is the principles that he explained. That kind of model of using principles and contextualizing for every age makes a lot more sense, and is also adaptable, but is also, especially for those who are not Christians, it is a lot more acceptable because it doesn't impose itself on you. Islam comes from the other not extreme, maybe an extreme is too hard a word, but certainly it comes from the other paradigm, and that is that there is a universal model that God has dictated, and he has given to the Prophet Muhammad, they believe, as that model, and what the Prophet Muhammad did, what he said, how he lived, is how we're to live and what we're to do today. That I stand against. Not a universal prophet. I don't believe that model is relevant for today. I think it has many problems, as we have been discussing.
Okay, Adnan, so that's the problem. You can't sort of impose in this way that Islam seeks to do, to kind of have everyone coming under this rule, if you like.
That is a misconception about Islam and Islamic law. If Jay had studied Islamic history carefully, which I believe he hasn't, which I will prove in a minute, why I believe that he would not have reached this conclusion. In Islamic history, we have examples such as Islamic Spain, where Christians and Jews had absolute judicial autonomy. They had Beth Din there, the Christians had their own quarters, they had their own way of dressing, they had pigs running around in that quarter, and Muslims allowed them to live under Islamic law. They had their own courts, their own way of life in their quarters. Another example of Ottoman Empire, in Constantinople, there was a neighborhood called Galata. Majority of the population of Galata were Jewish and Christian people, and they had their own courts there. But however, as Hamza earlier on quoted, that they preferred to come to Islamic courts to get justice, especially the women. Jewish women were approaching Islamic courts in order to get justice because in some cases Jewish law was absolutely discriminatory against the women's rights. Now, why I said that Jay hasn't studied Islamic history carefully, on 1st of March in 2008, Jay had a debate in this studio with Catherine Hallenstein, and he stated in that debate, and this is what he said.
I'm giving her an example that is found in Ibn Hisham. It's also found in Al-Waqidi. It's also found in Al-Bukhari, and it's found in Al-Tabari. Those are 4 different sources I'm giving her to go back and read. And when she says that these Jews were attacking Muhammad, ask and see if she can source that in any one of those 4 texts that I've just given her. Not any case did the Jews take any sword or any sense of provocation. It's fascinating to me how they have spun this for the modern today without ever going back to their own text.
So Jay, let's go back to our text. Jay made a claim there that it is not provable from Islamic sources that Jews ever provoked Muslims, and he said it very confidently, like he has read the sources. This is what convinced me that Jay hasn't actually looked into Islamic sources. I have Ibn Ishaq here right in front of me. I have Ibn Hisham right in front of me. I have Tabari right here with me. I have Bukhari with me. All of them unanimously say that Jews broke the treaty and they declared it, and Prophet Muhammad sent Sa'ad bin Mu'adh and Sa'ad bin Ubadah to discuss with them to go back to the treaty. And Jews were saying, no, we're not going to go back to the treaty. Instead, we're going to annihilate you together with Quraysh. And Muslims were fearing that annihilation. So whatever happened in Medina, this is what happened in Medina. So Jay needs to go back to Islamic sources himself and study them. I actually feel sorry for our Christian friends here because they come here to debate without having to do their homework. We can teach them if they come to us with sincere and open heart. We can help them. It is not good to cut and paste and be dishonest in order to suit your own purposes.
Well, that's the first time anyone's ever played back a portion of my programme on my programme, so that's a first for this.
Can I defend that real quickly?
But yes, go ahead.
I think it's interesting. I think this is what we call a straw man argument. So the straw man argument is that Jay is saying that they did not go back on a treaty. If you quote what I just said, it's the idea that they attacked the Prophet. That they had to be attacked. There's no reference there.
You said any provocation.
There was no physical provocation whatsoever. The Jews did not physically provoke the Prophet. What they did do, and
if I say I will give you £1,000 or £10,000 if you can prove to me from Islamic sources, any Islamic source, any. It's a big challenge. You can prove to me that there was no sense of provocation from the Jews. I will give you £10,000. I'm saying on the
Define
radio.
provocation that forced the Prophet to then take 800 and slit their throats in one afternoon. That's the provocation I'm asking for.
Get into semantics.
And I think what we need to be careful is, if you look at the stories there, you will see that in all three cases, in 624, in 625, and 627, and this has relevance to what we're talking about in our debate today, if the Prophet took those Jews, had they gone back on their treaty, if you can prove to me that they had gone back on their treaty using the sword to do so.
Islamic sources, Jay, as you said.
But define what you mean by going back on their treaty. A treaty that I would say that the Jews had no right even signing. I would never sign a treaty like that. What we're also finding out is we're only hearing this from those sources. And that's another curiosity. We're only hearing it from the Muslim sources that they signed the treaty and that they were okay with the treaty.
But you said to go back to Muslim sources, Jay.
I would love to know.
You insisted that let's go back to Muslim sources.
Absolutely. But
and we did, we found otherwise.
Look at the reaction of Muhammad to those Jews. And this is the criteria I'm going to use. Say Muhammad was here today in the 21st century, and he asked me to sign a treaty. Remember, Muhammad was a man that came to Medina. He didn't live there. He had only been there he'd only been there 2 years. So he was not a native to Medina. The Jews were. He then created a treaty which stipulated that he would be the arbiter between man and God. Now,
that is not true. I have the treaty right here in my hand. Shall I read it?
Go ahead. Read the first article.
First article. This is agreement of Allah's Prophet Muhammad shall apply to migrants, Quraysh, the citizens who have accepted Islam, and all such people who are in agreement with the above-mentioned bodies and side with them in war. And it continues.
Who have accepted Islam? How many Jews would have accepted Islam?
No, all those parties who agree with Muslims.
How many of them would have accepted Islam?
It doesn't say that they have accepted Islam.
Now,
Jay, you are spinning
again,
Islamic
sources. Here we go again. We've got a treaty that's been recorded in Ibn Hisham in the 9th century.
Yes, absolutely.
More than that, if that were being applied today in the 21st century, if that were being applied, would you stand and would you, even if you reneged on the treaty, let's say hypothetically you reneged on that treaty, should you therefore then be thrown out of London?
No.
Should you? And that's exactly what the Prophet did. Secondly, if you stood against the Prophet when he was engaging in warfare with the Meccans at this time, let's say you did stand, hypothetically. I'm not saying they did. Let's say someone was attacking the Prophet because he not start a theocratic state in London, and you were people that actually were natives to London, and someone was coming. Let's say the French were coming up, and you stood against the Prophet. Should you therefore then have 800 of your men throat slit, the women taken as concubines, and the children taken as slaves?
But the treaty, fascinating, in number 17.
That's the problem I'm having with this.
Clause number 17 states, it is incumbent on all the Muslims to help and extend sympathetic treatment to the Jews who have entered into an agreement with us. Neither an oppression of any type should be perpetrated on them, nor should the enemy be helped against them. Now, if we continue, this is a fascinating treaty. This is where Geneva Convention can be taken and seen as an alternative to this treaty. This is a 7th century Arabia.
Do we allow people who renege on a treaty to be an entire tribe to then have their throats slit? Do we allow that?
Let's allow Hamza. I can see you want to bring a perspective here.
Seldom I come to radio debates, and I probably never have gone to Hyde Park Corner because of this reason: sound bites, generalizations. Essentially, what I like to add is this: the reason Jay has a problem with understanding Islamic texts and Islamic law, and even has a problem with understanding secularism or any political ideology or set of concepts is because of the fact he is restricted within his own self-imposed construct of spiritualism. Whereas from the Islamic text point of view, we always viewed things from a holistic sense. So when we viewed the wars of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the economic concepts emanating from the Quran or the Hadith, which are the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, we view them in a holistic sense, which means a political sense and a spiritual sense. So, for example, when we view the foreign policy of Islam, which is defend the state, just like any secular state has a right to defend itself.
Secular state does.
Yep.
Not a theocratic state.
Your statement there is exactly what I'm talking about. When you look at Islam, you just say one or the other. It's either religious or it's secular political. But we don't even have that paradigm. We're not constricted within your own self-imposed constructs. The issue is we view Islam as a holistic, comprehensive ideology that deals with affairs of human beings. For example, just one example, economic problem. You say we should be secular, but under secular liberal capitalism, we have seen the worst economic crisis. We have the food crisis. We have a few rich, many poor. 60 million children have died in Africa alone in the past 10 years because of laissez-faire economic policies. My point is this: if the Islamic economic policies were in place today, you would have not only economic prosperity, but you would have the removal.
May I destroy that real quickly?
No.
Can I show exactly what Islam will do?
I understand what you're saying, okay.
Come on, you can't be the judge, the jury, and the executioner here. You have to let me speak.
But how can you speak of if we had it? How do you know that that would be the case?
Let me give you an example. And you're being quite objective there as the chair.
Well, I'm asking the question that people are asking.
The reason we have it because we have a precedence in history. Look at your Western historians, Christian, secular historians, and they quote, and I'll give you the references. They state that it was the only time in the Islamic state where people had food, shelter, and clothing. They discussed it. There's American scholars from your town, from your area.
America's not really a town.
From your home. Well, you came from a town, I suppose. Essentially, they come down to Britain in universities to say that the West must adopt the Islamic economic system, because its principles are not based upon individualism. Its principles are based upon distributive justice, for example. It's based upon removing the interest-based society. It's more comprehensive. It's a whole economic system.
Okay.
And the issue is, if this was applied today, as an example, you would not have the need for so-called missionaries to give people money on one hand, then the Bible on the other, which I see as a form of oppression.
Okay, J.M.
Okay, I think a good answer, and I thank you for that, Hamza, because you've actually brought it into an example of how you say liberal, democratic, capitalistic nations have usurped this responsibility. Let's look at some statistics. When you look at the world today, when you look at Muslim countries, there's about 32 Muslim countries that are considered to be Muslim-dominated countries.
They don't have
and there's about 40 Western countries that are considered to have Judeo-Christian.
Fallacious argument.
Whatever the case is, you used that argument already to say the West is already in decline. So I'm going to use your same criteria.
No, it's like state with state. There is
Hamza,
no
let me just
state.
May I finish, please? May I finish?
Well, you could talk to yourself.
Okay,
quality of life index that looks at life expectancy, mortality rate, illiteracy, education, health status, women's status, defense allotments, economic, demographic, and political stability. These are the criteria that they consider to be what they consider to be a healthy state. Quality of life index. When you look at these categories, you will find that 39 of the 40 Christian, now when I say that in parentheses, Christian-dominated countries are in the highest category, 9 or plus. That the 32 Muslim countries are all medium to very low categories, and that 5 of the 10 worst are Muslim countries. When you look at literacy, unpack it a bit. The 40 Christian countries are in the 90 percentile of literacy, whereas only one Muslim country gets into the 70 percentile. All the rest are in 10 and below percentile for literacy. When you talk about schooling, the 40 Christian countries today, 90% of them have secondary schooling or more, higher or higher. The best Muslim country is only 50% for secondary school, and that most Muslim countries come between 10 and 30th% of secondary school. Child mortality, we could go on and on.
We are in agreement.
Now, what is fascinating to me, so if Islam is such a great religion, theocratic state, if it does succeed, why is it the statistic doesn't bear that out?
There is no Islamic State today, President.
That's the interesting
in terms
thing.
Of constitution,
there is no Islamic State today,
In
yet
terms
it follows Islamic
in terms
principles.
Of constitution and in terms of application, philosophy and application, in any state, the Islamic Sharia is not manifest in anywhere in the Muslim world. But what you do have, which is quite surprising, is that these so-called Christian rulers, if you want to call them that, and you use the word Christian in parentheses.
Yeah, because there's no such thing as a Christian state.
But my point is this, though. The issue is this, that they are supporting the despotic rulers in the Middle East that boil and torture their political opponents to death just because they want Islam. I know friends personally that were jailed in Egypt for years just because they wanted Islam. I know of other political activists that want to revive the Muslim nations to go back to their own heritage. What is wrong with going back to your own heritage? 70%. And according to non-Muslim polls, the Gallup poll and in the University of Maryland, stating that over 70% of the Muslim population, women and men, want the Sharia to be applied on them.
Okay, let's allow...
The issue is, in 21st century
That scares me
Britain,
to death.
No, but that's the issue.
Let's allow...
I'm not
I'd love to
surprised.
get
Let's
to
go
get
to the
Beth
Sharia.
to have some-
As a woman, I can speak as a woman, where the Sharia would certainly have an impact on me. When it's interesting, when you're blaming the West. Muslims often do this. They blame the West when there's a problem in the Muslim world. As we've seen, it is not as a healthy place to live in the Muslim world. Now, the closer, we're not saying there is a Muslim state, or Muslims say there's not a Muslim state in the world, but the closer you go to Islamic principles, the closer you go to the four schools of law. I know you said you don't abide by that necessarily, Adnan, but the closer you go to the Quran...
You're insisting to make us follow schools of
what
thought,
I'm
which
saying,
we won't.
Okay, so let's throw out the Sharia. So the Sharia is not...
No, Sharia is Quran and Hadith. That's Sharia.
Okay,
let's make it clear.
that's what you say the Sharia
The
is.
schools are not Sharia.
Okay, the Sharia law. Let's throw out the Sharia law. Let's just go to the Quran. Let's go
if
to the
you insist.
Hadith. There are even worse problems especially for a woman in those situations. Look at what Muhammad said about women. For example, on the verse in the Quran where it says that a woman is half the testimony, he says because she's deficient in her intelligence. That's what
Quran
Muhammad
says that
said.
she's
No,
deficient.
Bukhari says that.
So
but the
where
Quran says
does
a woman.
Quran
Let me
say?
finish. The Quran says that a woman cannot have has half the testimony of a man, and Bukhari says the reason for this is she's deficient in her religion.
That's
That's
not
what he
true.
said.
Bukhari does
He
not
did
say
that.
that.
Let me
Bukhari
I'll
does
give
not
you the
say that.
quotation. In Bukhari chapter 1, in book 1, verse
Let me
number
clarify.
3,
Bukhari does not
is not the testimony of a woman equivalent to that half of a man. That's what Muhammad said. Another thing Muhammad said in Bukhari, book 7, verse 33, after me have not left any affliction more harmful to men than woman. Another thing, a woman is deficient
you made
in
a
her
statement,
religion.
Beth, you made a statement that Bukhari says that because of this verse in the Quran, why is this verse saying this? Muhammad said that because women are deficient in intellect. Bukhari says that about this verse. Can you quote that, please, from Bukhari?
Say that again.
You made a statement that Muhammad said about this verse.
What I'm saying, this
why
verse,
their testimony is half? Because they're deficient in intellect. You said Bukhari says that.
The
Can you
Quran,
please pull that out?
what I'm saying, the Quran has this verse.
Can you not pull that out from Bukhari?
Let me finish. The Quran has a verse that says that
Again,
women...
another example of
let me
distorting
finish.
the sources.
The Quran has a verse that women have half the testimony of a man.
Quran doesn't say that.
I'm
Quran does not say.
I am
No, that's your
paraphrasing.
interpretation
I am
of Quran. Let's go to
Surah
Quran
2, Ayah 282. If you want to read it, just read it. We can read it out.
Here's the problem. The problem is the interpretation
No,
is spin.
let's read the text himself.
Let's allow Beth to finish what she was saying.
But then we're just...
So what I'm saying is, the women who obviously would know the Quran asked Muhammad, why, Muhammad, can we not, is the testimony half that of a man? He said, because they are deficient in their intelligence.
Can you read the
Why?
text, please?
Okay, I'll read the text. It says, let me read. It says here, I've just got, when Muhammad replied to the women when they asked this question, is not the testimony of a woman equivalent to half the testimony of a man? And then here he says, when it comes to deficiency in religion.
You're going to a separate hadith now. You're jumping from one
I
hadith.
know, but
you're trying to
it's
fix them
actually,
together.
It's in the same hadith.
No, this is distortion.
No,
we call
it
it
is
in English distortion.
It is actually in the same hadith. I just don't have the whole hadith before me. Go read it for
Okay.
yourself.
Homework,
Bukhari 7. No, this is your homework. Bukhari 7.
The proof is on you.
Let's allow Beth to quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give us this quote then.
Okay, Bukhari 1, book 1, and number 301 is where it talks about this, that a woman's testimony is half that to a man. And then in another one, in Bukhari 1 and 301, it says that it's not the case that when a woman menstruates, she can neither pray or fast? And he replied, yes, this pertains to the deficiency of her religion. Now this is straight.
Thank you very much.
This
You've
is
hit the nail on the head.
straight
Woman
from
is,
the
if she's
hadith.
deficient in religion, how? She meant a woman in Islam. Yeah, a woman menstruates for a week. She is not allowed to pray. She's not allowed to pray because she's having pains. She's having difficulty.
Actually, can I say,
And
Adnan,
it's
as
the
a
mercy
woman,
of
that is
Islam.
the time
It's the
I
mercy
want
of
to pray.
Islam
That is the time
Prophet
I
Muhammad
need to
allowed women
pray.
not to pray because praying can be difficult sometimes. You have to wake up in the morning. So Prophet allowed them not to pray
It's not
because
just
they're
that.
having
We
those
are,
pains of
we are
period.
also considered unclean. In Quran 2, ayah 222, it says that a woman is unclean when she has her period. I'm paraphrasing again.
Absolutely
And
not.
So it
Absolutely.
does so.
Quran
It
doesn't
says,
say
and
that.
then it says, go to your woman, when she has finished her menses, go to your woman as and how you wish you want to. Basically, it does allow for marital rape. I emphasized this
So
in the
you're
last debate that I
interpreting
had.
that
What
as
I'm
rape.
saying, it allows for it, which is not appropriate for this
Can I
culture.
clarify this point? Beth just made a claim. Beth just
Okay,
made a claim.
let's not everyone speak at once. Okay.
2:23.
Adnan, a minute, then a minute for Hamza.
Beth just raised a point. Amazing. Again, I would recommend them to go to the early sources of Islam, the commentary of Quran, which is in Hadith. Why was this verse revealed in the first place? We have something called Asbab al-Nuzul. Surah 2, verse 223 is stating that go to your woman as you please. If you go to the reason for the revelation of this verse in the commentary of Ibn Kathir, you haven't read it. If you read it, you would know. It states there, the Jews used to believe in Medina that if you come to your wife in a different manner than the Jews come to their wife, your children will be born cross-eyed.
Yeah.
Cross-eyed. Thank you very much. He's agreeing with this. So this is why the woman had a problem in Medina to sleep with their husbands in different ways, in different manners. So Allah revealed this verse in the Quran in order to tell them, as long as you come to your woman naturally, not unnatural sex, natural sex, you can do it as you like. That's what Quran is doing, and it's answering the query of Jews. It is not saying come and rape your wife. That is a misrepresentation of Islam, and commentaries are clear on this.
Muhammad said in Bukhari, volume 7, number 121, he says, Muhammad says, if a man invites his wife to sleep with him and she refuses him, then the angels send their curses on her until the morning.
Does it say that he can rape her?
Pardon?
Does it say that he can rape her?
No, I'm saying,
Thank you, Beth. It doesn't say that he can rape her.
for it.
Yet she's sinning. She's sinning by refusing her husband.
Okay, quickly,
This
I did
goes
promise
against your argument.
Hamza. Okay.
Now, this is the problem of quoting when we don't have knowledge or information. That's why I don't quote Bible. Yeah? And I expect Beth and I expect Jay not to quote either, because their Arabic knowledge is probably very minimal. They don't have any knowledge of the grammatical sciences, of the Arabic sciences, or of systematic theology in the classical tradition. So for them to start quoting, it's a bit, I just want to pick and choose to win an argument, and I think that exposes them. Whereas I want to contextualize the debate, and we need to look at the holistic sense of Christianity and Islam. And we should come back to the debate here, if it's valid for 21st century Britain. And 21st century Britain is a 21st century secular state. Is a 21st century secular state. And is Islam a valid and relevant intellectual and political challenge to secularism? I would say yes, because of the fact that Islam is based on intellectual creed. You could prove the existence of God, and we have a miraculous, inimitable text called the Quran, which we can prove and attribute to the sole cause of the universe, which we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalted is He. So it's an intellectual challenge. Secondly, it's a political challenge because it has systems emanating from its thoughts, the Quran and the Hadith, which is the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that actually deals with economics. And what you quoted there, Jay, it was fantastic, because you are saying that the Muslim world is in this problem because they don't have Islam. And we know, generally, they don't have Islam in terms of constitution. Now, when it comes to women, first and foremost, we will need a Muslim woman here to express herself as well, based on her tradition, so they could debate very kindly with Beth, because I don't want to assume that being the mouthpiece of the Muslim woman. However, knowing Muslim women, I understand and I know that the actual Muslim woman is actually liberated. If we want to take an objective view, I won't say nothing. I'll put the words in the famous feminist. She wasn't a Christian and she wasn't a Muslim. What did she say? She say, by scanning the text, looking at the text holistically, not pick and choosing, by scanning the text, we find that Islam actually liberated the woman and Christianity oppressed her. And we see that in various chapters throughout the Bible.
Okay, Adnan, and I'm going to have to keep you to a minute.
I'll be very quick. Just to come back to that point quickly, Jay acknowledged that a woman can be divorced but cannot remarry. Quran, Surah 2, verse number 232. And when you divorce women and they have come to the end of their waiting period, stop them not from marrying other men if they have agreed with each other in fair manner. Surah 2, 229. The divorce is twice. After that, either you retain her or on reasonable terms or release her with kindness. And it is not lawful for you, the men, to take back from your wives any of your dowry which you have given them. So that establishes everything between Christianity and Islam. Coming back to 21st century Britain. What is 21st century Britain?
21st century Britain has problems which requires strong solutions. We as British citizens, and we love Britain, we love the freedom in Britain, and we believe this is Islamic freedom. It reminds me of Islamic Spain. The benefit and the freedom of the justice, equality is fascinating. 21st century Britain has problems of crime, binge drinking, antisocial behavior, and I think Islam has a strong deterrent, and Islam has financial laws, Islam has moral laws, social laws. All these laws collectively can reform the British society into a very, very impressive society, and it can turn into a living paradise. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for being with us, Adnan, on the programme today. Jay, if you would sum up the case for Christianity as being the most relevant faith.
You've done a good job. I think you've managed to keep us from jumping on each other. I think you've managed to keep some semblance of coherence here. It is a difficult subject. I think we all realize that. It's not enough for just a 40-minute to try to unpack all of it. The question was, which is more relevant today, Islam or Christianity? The Muslims have done a good job, I think, of trying to say that the Islam is more relevant because it is a whole way of life. It's that whole way of life that scares me. As a Christian, I do not want the state to impose on the church my freedoms to worship my God. The beauty of Christianity is it's a private faith. It is a faith that creates a relationship between God and man. When I accept Christ as my Lord and Savior, when I accept what He did on the cross, that He died and rose again, when I do that, then the Holy Spirit then comes and affects me, sanctifies me, changes me from within. I remember what Beth said at the very beginning. That starts a redemption and lift. That lift that happens to me, happens to my family, to my community, to society, and yes, makes an impact. And we've seen that impact in the last 2,000 years. It's taken us 2,000 years to get to where we are. That Christianity has made an impact on the state and, yes, on the culture. That has not imposed it. It has not used rules and regulations. It comes from relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, in that one thing right there, Islam has no answer. And I thank God that I have the freedom to say this. I thank God that I have the freedom to preach it, and I will so. Come on home, people. Come on back to Jesus Christ.
All right. Thank you so much to all our guests on the programme today. Don't forget you can listen back online, Premier.
مولاي قد نمت عيون وتيقظت أيضا عيون نمت عيون الخائنين وعين نجمك لا تخون نمت عيون الخائنين وعين نجمك لا تخون مولاي قد نمت عيون وتيقظت أيضا عيون نمت عيون الخائنين وعين نجمك لا تخون نمت عيون الخائنين وعين غافلة عن الدنيا الخون تراه أذهلها جلال الله أم مر القرون أتراه أذهلها جلال الله أم مر القرون مولاي قد نامت عيون وتيقظت أيضا عيون نامت عيون الخائنين وعين نجمك لا تخون نامت عيون الخائنين وعين نجمك لا تخون أم أن من فوق الثرى لا يسمعون ولا يعون ويح نفسي فلم ترى وهي ترسف في سجود ويح نفسي فلم ترى وهي ترسف في سجود وهي ترسف